Arthur St. Vincent, the 8th Duke of Ashworth, was a man carved from granite. His fortune was vast, his title unblemished, and his heart famously silent. He managed his life like his prized Italianate gardens, with rigid control, suffocating precision, and no tolerance for wildness. But his perfect world is dying. The gardens are blighted, and the only person who can save them is a woman who is everything he detests, penniless, passionate, and dangerously observant. She's about to bring chaos to his orderly world, and he's about to discover that you can't shelter yourself from the storms of life without missing the feeling of the rain. Arthur St. Vincent, the Duke of Ashworth, inhabited Blackwood Manor not as a home, but as a fortress against the untidiness of human emotion. His boots, polished to a mirror, shine by a footman named Thomas, never crossed the threshold of his study without a purpose. His days were measured by the ticks of the grand regulator clock in the hall, a timepiece he wound himself every Sunday at precisely 10 in the evening. His correspondence was answered within the hour, his ledgers balanced to the halfpenny, and his heart. His heart was a perfectly managed account, solvent but never drawn upon. He was, at 32, the master of one of England's great fortunes, and he had achieved it by excising the passionate volatility that had ruined his father and sent his mother to an early, whispered-about grave in France. Arthur valued logic. He prized order. He demanded obedience. This philosophy was most evident in the famous Blackwood Gardens. They were not a place of joy, but a statement of dominance. Hedges were trimmed to geometric impossibilities. Flower beds were segregated by color, their blooms forced into unnatural symmetry. There was no unruly ivy, no vulgar wildflower, no chaotic buzzing of bees. There was only silence, gravel, and the suffocating scent of trimmed boxwood. And now, that statement was failing. A rust-colored blight, impervious to the head gardener's chemicals, was creeping from the rose arbors to the lavender borders. It was a creeping stain of failure, and it was visible from Arthur's study window. It was an affront. "It is unacceptable, Davis," Arthur said, his voice as flat as the grey sky. He stood on the terrace, staring at a row of dying hybrid teas. Mr. Davies, a man who had served Arthur's father, twisted his cap. "Your Grace, we've tried the copper sulfate. We've tried the lime wash. It's a virulence. I've not seen its like." "Then you are not looking hard enough," Arthur replied, though there was no heat in it. It was a statement of fact. "Find someone who can." Davies, fearing for his position, had spent a week writing letters. The response he brought to the Duke's study was hesitant. "Your Grace, the Royal Horticultural Society. They speak of a botanist, a specialist in fungal rot and soil rehabilitation. They say this person has unconventional methods but unparalleled results. They saved the Marwood Estate's orchards." "Hire them," Arthur said, not looking up from a shipping manifest. "Very good, Your Grace. I've sent the carriage for C. Benson." Arthur nodded, dismissing the matter. He expected a fussy older man, perhaps smelling of peat and tobacco. He would put him in the East Wing, listen to his diagnosis, pay his fee, and be rid of him. 3 days later, the carriage returned. Arthur was in the study, reviewing the quarterly reports from his coal mines. He heard the gravel crunch, but it was the silence that followed that was unusual. There was no heavy boot tread, no deferential coughing. He heard his butler, Jennings, his voice tight with confusion. May I help you, madam? Are you lost?" A new voice, clear as a bell and utterly unbothered, replied, "I am not lost. I am C. Benson. I am expected." Arthur's pen stopped moving. He rose slowly and walked to the study door, opening it just as Jennings was attempting to block the entrance to the main hall. The person standing on his marble floor was not a fussy old man. She was, perhaps, 25. Her chestnut hair was pinned in a practical but slightly messy knot. Her travelling dress was of a sensible, cheap grey wool, and her boots were sturdy and splattered with mud. She carried a leather satchel and a specimen case. She was observing the hall not with awe, but with a clinical, appraising gaze, as if she were diagnosing the house itself. "You," Arthur stated. She turned. Her eyes were a bright, intelligent hazel. She did not curtsy. She did not lower her gaze. "You must be the Duke of Ashworth. I am Clara Benson. Your man, Mr. Davies, wrote of a significant fungal infection in your rosacea." "I was expecting C. Benson," Arthur said, his voice dropping a full octave in displeasure. "Charles. Or perhaps Christopher." "My father was Charles," she said simply. "He taught me everything he knew, and I have since learned a great deal more. The society recommends me, Your Grace, not my late father. Do you have a problem with my name, or with my work?" Jennings looked as if he might faint. No one spoke to the Duke with such clarity. Arthur felt an unfamiliar sensation. He was off balance. He prided himself on never being surprised. "I have a problem with blight, Miss Benson. My gardens are the most precise in England. They are failing." "Yes," she said, stepping past him and walking directly to the terrace doors, uninvited. She looked out at the geometric browns and dying reds. "I can see that." She turned back, her gaze sweeping over his study. It was a room of dark mahogany, leather-bound books arranged by height, and not a single personal effect, save for a miniature of his stern-faced father. "Your gardens are not failing, Your Grace," she said, her voice softening slightly, as if speaking to a child. "They are suffocating. You have starved the soil, eliminated every beneficial insect, and demanded perfection from things that were meant to be wild. The blight isn't an invasion. It's a symptom. Your garden is sterile. It has, quite simply, given up." Arthur stared at her. She had been on his property for less than 5 minutes, and had just condemned his entire philosophy. He should have had her thrown out. He should have returned to his ledgers. But, for the first time in a decade, the master of Blackwood Manor didn't know what to do next. "What?" he said, the word sounding rusted. "Do you propose?" Clara Benson actually smiled. It was a small, dangerous thing. "Chaos, Your Grace. I propose absolute, unadulterated chaos." Clara Benson's prescription of chaos began the following morning. Arthur, rising at his customary 6 a.m., looked down from his window to see her already on the main lawn, not with pruning shears, but with a spade. She was not directing the groundskeepers. She was digging. She had demanded a small plot of land, adjacent to the formal gardens, but blessedly hidden by a yew hedge. When Arthur joined her, dressed in his immaculate riding coat, he found her ankle-deep in mud, sleeves rolled to the elbow, wrestling with a clump of what looked suspiciously like common weeds. "Miss Benson," he said, stopping a clean 10 feet from the dirt. "This is not the diseased area." "No, Your Grace," she panted, leveraging a large root from the earth. "This is the laboratory. I am preparing a compost tea. Your soil is dead. It has no fungi, no microbes, no life. It's just grit. I need to brew a cure." She motioned to several large barrels. "I'll need manure from the stables, and kitchen scraps, vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, eggshells, and I'll need all the grass cuttings, and preferably that entire hedge of dying buxus." Arthur felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. "You intend to create a refuse pile on the grounds of Blackwood Manor?" "I intend to create a nursery," she corrected, wiping a streak of mud from her cheek with her forearm. I will not waste my time fighting the blight in your garden. I will make the garden so healthy it fights the blight itself. To do that, I need to bring in life. Worms, ladybirds, lacewings. For 2 weeks, Blackwood Manor was turned upside disk. Clara was a whirlwind. She argued with Mr. Davies, who was appalled by her methods. She charmed the kitchen staff into giving her their waste. She was seen walking the perimeter woods, gathering leaf mould and fungi in her satchel. Arthur watched. He watched from his study window as she instructed the younger gardeners on how to build a large, steaming pile of compost. He watched her reject a shipment of expensive chemical fertilizer he had ordered. "This is poison," she told him flatly, holding up the sack. "It is salt. It burns the microbes. You might as well water your roses with acid." The true battle began when she turned her attention to the formal garden itself. "The monoculture has to end," she declared, standing on the terrace with him. "These roses are all the same hybrid. They are weak. They are susceptible to the same disease. They must be interplanted." "Interplanted? With what?" Arthur asked, dreading the answer. "Allium, marigolds, lavender. They repel aphids. And here," she pointed to the boxwood hedges, "we must plant clover and vetch to fix nitrogen in the soil. We will have to let the grass grow." "Let it grow?" "It's a lawn, Your Grace, not a billiard table. The roots need to breathe." This was an attack on his very foundations, but the blight was, undeniably, spreading. He had no choice. He gave his assent, and the staff, following his reluctant nod, began to enact her strange commands. The immaculate, sterile garden became messy. There were patches of clover. There were bright, common marigolds tucked beside aristocratic roses. The sound of scything replaced the snip, snip, snip of the shears, and Arthur found his own routines breaking. He found himself walking the grounds, not to inspect, but to watch her. He watched her talk to the plants. He watched her crouch in the dirt, examining a beetle as if it were a diamond. She was utterly absorbed, entirely present in a way he had never seen anyone be. She moved with a purpose that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with a strange, quiet joy. One afternoon, he found her standing perfectly still, her face tilted to the sun. "What are you doing, Miss Benson?" She startled, then smiled. "Listening, Your Grace. The bees are back. Do you hear them? They weren't here last week. They like the lavender." He listened. There was, indeed, a low, vibrant hum that had not been there before. It was disruptive. "You seem to enjoy this disorder," he said. It was not a compliment. "I don't see disorder," she replied, turning to him. Her face was smudged with dirt, and she was, he realized with a jolt, quite beautiful in her wildness. "I see a system, a community, everything working together. Your hedges were at war with the soil. This is peace." Before he could form a retort, a carriage bearing the crest of his nearest neighbour, Lord Harrington, rolled up the drive. Harrington was a man of similar breeding but opposite temperament. He was loud, indulgent, and lived for gossip. He and Arthur maintained a cool rivalry. Harrington stepped out, his waistcoat a shocking shade of canary yellow. "My dear Ashworth, I heard you had an infestation. Came to see the damage." His eyes scanned the grounds, widening in theatrical disbelief at the state of the messy gardens. And then his gaze landed on Clara. It lingered, appreciative and insolent. And what have we here? A new garden nymph, a woodland sprite? My goodness, Arthur, I didn't realize your tastes ran so rustic. Arthur's blood ran cold. The insinuation was vulgar and immediate. Before Arthur could deliver a chilling set down, Clara stepped forward, wiping her hands on a rag. She did not blush. "Lord Harrington," she said, her voice cutting through the air, "I am Miss Benson, the botanist retained by the Duke. You are looking at a garden in triage. Unless you are here to deliver the 4 wagon loads of aged manure I am expecting, I'm afraid you are in the way." Harrington's jaw dropped. He looked from the muddy, insolent woman to the stone-faced Duke. Arthur St. Vincent did the single most illogical thing he had done in his adult life. He almost smiled. "You heard Miss Benson, Harrington," Arthur said. "If you are not delivering manure, you are, as she said, in the way." The slight victory over Lord Harrington shifted something unspoken between them. Arthur had defended her, or at least had not contradicted her. The staff, seeing this, doubled their efforts. Mr. Davies, recognizing Clara's genuine knowledge, ceased his grumbling and began to ask her questions. The garden, nourished by the strange compost teas and teeming with new, beneficial insects, began to breathe. The blight, while not gone, had stopped spreading. The new growth on the roses was a healthy, vibrant green. Arthur found himself seeking her out. He told himself it was to monitor his investment. He would find her in the new glass house she'd commandeered, sketching in a notebook. "What is that?" he asked, pointing to her drawing. "A planting schematic. I am designing a new border for the south lawn, based on what should be here. Native perennials. Echinacea, Rudbeckia. Plants that belong to this soil, not imports forced to survive." She spoke of the plants as if they were people. "They will be stronger. They will not need coddling. You enjoy this," he stated, watching her hands as she sketched. They were strong, calloused, and stained with earth. "I love it," she said simply, meeting his gaze. "I love taking something broken and reminding it how to live. Soil, plants, it is all the same." The quiet implication hung in the air. People. This new, fragile peace was shattered one morning after a heavy dew. A cry went up from one of the undergardeners. Arthur and Clara arrived at the same time. The new seedlings, the ones Clara had painstakingly cultivated in the glass house and just planted out, were destroyed. Not by blight, not by pests. They had been systematically crushed, stomped into the mud by a heavy boot. Worse, the taps on her compost tea barrels had been opened, the precious, life-giving liquid draining uselessly into the gravel paths. It was sabotage. Mr. Davies was white-faced. "Your Grace, I swear I locked the gate." Arthur's face was a mask of cold fury. All his progress, all his tentative trust in this new chaos, vanished. This was the result. Disorder bred weakness. Weakness invited attack. "This is what your community breeds, Miss Benson," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Vulnerability. My methods, the methods of my father, were rigid. But they were secure." Clara was kneeling, touching a crushed stem. Her face was pale, but her eyes were blazing. "This was not a weakness. This was malice. This was a person, Your Grace, not a philosophy. Someone did this." "Your methods invited it," he countered, stepping back. "You tore down the walls. You let the wild in. This is the consequence." She stood up slowly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You are wrong," she whispered. "I am never wrong about this," he said, the ice returning to his voice. "I have built my life on this principle. Passion, wildness, feeling, it is a sickness. It invites ruin. You will return the gardens to their previous configuration. Your experiment is over." He expected her to weep. He expected her to plead for her job. He expected her to be the cowed employee. Instead, Clara Benson slapped him. The sound cracked through the damp morning air. Davies gasped and fled. The undergardeners vanished. Arthur's head snapped to the side, a bright red mark blooming on his pale cheek. He turned back to her, his eyes not angry, but wide with pure, unadulterated shock. No one had ever touched him in anger. Clara was shaking, but not with fear, with a profound, towering rage. "How dare you?" she breathed. "You stand there in your polished boots, judging a world you refuse to even touch. You hide in your stone house and call it strength. It is not strength. It is the most profound cowardice I have ever seen. Miss Benson, no, you will listen. You talk of ruin? My father was a man of passion. He loved music, he loved gambling, and he loved my mother. And yes, he ruined us. He lost our home, our name, our future, all for the feeling of it. I know what ruin looks like, Your Grace. I have lived in it. I have scrubbed floors and sold off my mother's jewelry just to eat." Arthur was frozen. This was the C. Benson who was a disgraced gentlewoman. This was the truth. "But you," she continued, jabbing a finger at his chest, "you are already ruined. You are just too wealthy to notice. You have cut yourself off from everything that matters. You see a crushed plant, and you blame life. This," she gestured to the sabotage, "was an act of fear. Just like yours. You are terrified of feeling anything, because your father couldn't handle his wife's heart. You've built a mausoleum and called it a life." She was breathing hard, tears of pure fury streaming down her face, leaving clean tracks in the dirt on her cheeks. Arthur said nothing. He couldn't. She had taken his carefully constructed world and shattered it with a few brutal truths. His mother, his father, the scandal he had spent his entire life trying to bury under layers of duty and ice. He remembered his mother, laughing, trying to pull his father outside to dance in the summer showers. He remembered his father's face, tight with rage, yanking her arm. "Control yourself, woman. You are a duchess." Clara, seeing his silence, mistook it for dismissal. The fight went out of her. "I see," she said, her voice hollow. "I will pack my things." She turned and walked away, not toward the house, but toward the woods. Arthur stood alone in the ruined nursery, his cheek stinging. The silence that returned was not peaceful. It was the screaming silence of a tomb. He looked at the crushed seedling in his path, and for the first time he felt a sting that had nothing to do with his pride. It felt desolate. Arthur did not return to his ledgers. He could not. Clara's words echoed in the suffocating stillness of his study. "You are already ruined. You are just too wealthy to notice." He stayed in that room for hours, the regulator clock ticking off the seconds, each one a hammer blow against the armor he had worn for so long. He had structured his existence around one singular belief. That emotion was the enemy. That the passion which drove his mother to run away with an artist and his father to drink himself into an early grave was a genetic taint he must suppress. He had succeeded. He had become the Stone Duke. And as he stood there, his cheek still throbbing, he realized that Clara was right. It was an act of profound cowardice. He looked out the window. The grey sky from the morning had deepened to a bruised, heavy purple. The air was thick, promising a deluge. He saw her, a small figure, sitting on a stone bench by the edge of the woods, her head in her hands. She hadn't packed. She was just sitting. As he watched, the sky tore open. It wasn't a gentle shower. It was a violent, driving summer storm. The wind whipped the trees, and the rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. It turned the perfect gravel paths into muddy rivers and battered the already weakened roses. Arthur's first instinct was control. Shelter. He grabbed a heavy oilcloth coat from the hall and strode out onto the terrace, bracing against the wind. "Miss Benson," he yelled over the roar of the storm, "get inside! You'll catch your death!" She looked up. Her hair was plastered to her head and face in seconds. The sensible grey dress was soaked through, clinging to her. She looked wretched. He marched across the lawn, the ground sucking at his polished boots, ruining them. He reached her and held out the coat. "Come. Now." She looked at the coat, then up at his face. He expected her to obey. He was the Duke. He was offering shelter. Clara Benson started to laugh. It was not a hysterical laugh. It was a rich, genuine sound that was swallowed by the wind. "Catch my death!" she shouted, tilting her head back to the sky, letting the rain hit her full in the face. "It's just water, Your Grace." "It is a dangerous storm. This is madness. You are freezing," he insisted, trying to force the coat onto her shoulders. She pushed it away. "I'm not freezing. I'm feeling something. Have you ever done that? Have you ever just stood in a storm and let it happen? This is absurd. It's real," she cried, standing up. She was trembling, either from cold or emotion. He couldn't tell. "This is what you're so afraid of. This is the chaos you hate. It's life. It's loud and it's messy and it's powerful, and it doesn't care about your hedges or your ledgers." She grabbed his hand, his pristine, gloved hand. She pulled the glove off and held his bare hand, palm up, to the sky. The shock of the cold raindrops hitting his skin was electric. It was so intense, he flinched. "Feel it," she commanded, her voice softer now, her eyes locked on his. "It's not an inconvenience. It's not a line item in a report on crop damage. It's just the rain. It's washing the world clean. It's washing us clean." He stared at his hand. He stared at the water pooling in his palm. He remembered his mother, her face bright, her hand outstretched just like this, begging his father to join her. "Arthur, feel it. It's delicious." His father had called her a child. He had locked the terrace doors. Arthur looked at Clara. She was soaked, shivering, magnificent. She was the chaos. She was the passion. She was everything he had been taught to fear. And in that moment, she was the only thing that felt true. He didn't know how to respond. The architecture of his mind had no room for this. So he did the only thing he could. He turned, wordlessly, and walked back to the house, leaving her in the storm. He shut the heavy oak doors, the sound a dull thud. He stood in the grand hall, water dripping from his tailored coat, forming a puddle on the immaculate marble. Jennings, the butler, rushed forward with a towel, his face a mask of horror. "Your Grace, you are soaked!" Arthur ignored him. He looked at his bare hand, still tingling from the cold. He looked at the puddle on the floor. His perfect, sterile fortress had been breached. He walked past his study, past the library, and up the grand staircase. He went to his own rooms and dismissed his valet. He stood at his own window, watching the storm rage, watching her small, defiant figure, still standing by the trees. Then, slowly, deliberately, Arthur St. Vincent, the 8th Duke of Ashworth, unlatched his window. He opened it wide, letting the wind and the spray blast into his perfect, orderly room, scattering papers from his desk. He put his hand back out, palm up, and closed his eyes. He felt the rain. The storm, when it passed, left the world saturated and clear. The next morning, Arthur awoke to a different house. The air was clean, and the oppressive silence had been replaced by the sound of dripping eaves and resurgent birdsong. He dressed and went downstairs, not to his study, but outside. He found Clara in the glass house. She was, surprisingly, dry. She had a bag packed at her feet. She looked up as he entered, her expression wary, resigned. "Miss Benson," he said. Your Grace, I am just gathering my specimens. I will be ready for the morning carriage. You will not, he said. She paused, a trowel in her hand. Your Grace? The sabotage. It was not a philosophical failure. It was, as you said, an act of malice. I was wrong to conflate the two. He could not bring himself to apologize for his words about her father. But this was a start. You are not dismissed. She stared at him, searching his face. The ice was still there, but it was thinner. It had cracks. What about the gardens? Your father's methods? My father is dead, Arthur said. His methods are failing. Continue with yours. He turned and left before she could respond. He was not yet a man who could navigate a thank you. Clara, stunned but resolute, stayed. The work resumed, but the dynamic had changed. The line between employer and employee had blurred. Arthur still kept his distance, but he no longer just observed. He listened. He joined her on her walks. She taught him the names of the wildflowers he had always dismissed as weeds. She explained why the clover helped the roses, how the spiders were their allies. He, in turn, found himself speaking. He told her about the coal mines, the ledgers, the crushing weight of the legacy. He spoke of his father's obsession with appearances, his terror of scandal. He did not speak of his mother. He did not speak of the rain. But she felt it, a current of change running beneath his composed surface. The garden flourished. The blight was in full retreat. The roses, surrounded by their new, chaotic companions, bloomed with a vigor the groundskeepers had never seen. The lawns were alive. But as the garden healed, the human world grew diseased. Gossip, fertilized by Lord Harrington, was spreading. The Duke was spending hours alone with his rustic gardener. He had been seen in the rain with her. He had defended her, even after she'd turned his famous gardens into a common meadow. Harrington, seeing his rival's mask slip, and jealous of the attention the Duke was giving a woman who had so thoroughly insulted him, decided to investigate this C. Benson. He arrived one afternoon, unannounced, under the guise of admiring the miraculous recovery of the gardens. He found Arthur and Clara on the terrace, dirty, laughing over a shared horticultural joke. The sight of Arthur laughing was so astonishing, it confirmed Harrington's darkest suspicions. "Ashworth," he boomed. "And Miss Benson. How diligent you are. Still at it." "Harrington," Arthur said, his good mood evaporating. "I must say I am impressed. Truly, such a turnaround. It made me quite curious about your methods, Miss Benson. I had some of my men in London make inquiries. You are, it seems, quite the prodigy, though Benson is not the name they know you by." Clara went utterly still. The colour drained from her face. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice thin. "Oh, I think you do," Harrington sneered, enjoying his moment. "A brilliant botanist, a disgraced family, a father who gambled away a fortune at White's and then put a pistol to his own head." Arthur looked at Clara. Her face was a mask of pure terror. "You see, Ashworth," Harrington said, leaning in conspiratorially, "your miracle worker isn't a simple gardener. She is Miss Clara Davenport, daughter of the most notorious bankrupt in London. She's been hiding here under an assumed name, working you like a prize trout." Davenport. Arthur knew the name. The scandal had been immense, whispered about for years. "She's a liar, Ashworth," Harrington pressed. "A penniless social climber, no doubt hoping you'll be foolish enough to overlook her past for this." He gestured at Clara's dirt-smudged, flushed appearance. Arthur felt the blood drain from his own face. It was not anger he felt, but a profound, sickening cold. Deception. the one thing he could not tolerate. He had opened his world just a crack, and this was what had crawled inside. It confirmed his oldest, darkest fear. Passion. Feeling. It was all a lie. It was a tool. His mother had used it to destroy his father, and now Clara Davenport had used it to fool him. The shared jokes, the talk of the soil, the moment in the rain. It was all a calculated performance. "Is this true?" Arthur's voice was not his own. It was a hollow echo from a frozen cavern. Clara looked at him, her eyes pleading. "Arthur, Your Grace, yes. My name is Clara Davenport. My father, he did what Lord Harrington said. I had no choice. No one would hire me. Benson was my mother's name. I only wanted to work. I only wanted to deceive," Arthur finished. "No, to survive." "Get out, Harrington," Arthur said, his voice lethal. Harrington, seeing his work was done, bowed. "Of course. Just thought a friend should know who he's tilling the soil with." He left. The terrace was silent, save for the hum of the bees Clara had been so proud of. "You lied to me," Arthur said. I omitted," she whispered. "It was the only way. You stood in my garden and lectured me on truth. You spoke of my father, my family. You judged me. All of it. A lie." "The work was not a lie," she cried, stepping toward him. "What I taught you, what we talked about, that was not a lie." "Don't touch me," he commanded, as she reached for his arm. He flinched from her touch, as if from a hot iron. The rain, the touch of her hand, it had all been a lie. He felt the ice reforming, thicker this time, brittle and sharp. The crack was sealing over. "You said you were an expert in reminding things how to live," he said, his voice devoid of all life. "You are, it seems, merely an expert in performance, just like my mother." The cruelty of the comparison struck her silent. "You will pack your things. You will be gone by morning. I will have your final wages sent to wherever it is people like you go." He turned and walked back into the stone fortress, locking the terrace doors behind him. Clara stood on the terrace, shattered, just like my mother. He had taken her deepest wound, her father's ruin, and twisted it into a weapon. He had used her honesty against her. She did not weep. She was past tears. She was back to the cold, hard reality of survival. She was Clara Davenport, the bankrupt's daughter, and she had been foolish enough to believe a man like Arthur St. Vincent could see her instead of her name. She returned to her small room in the servants' wing and began to pack her few belongings, her books, her sketches, her specimen case. She would leave tonight. She would not wait for the morning carriage. She would not endure the humiliation of the servants' pitying or scornful glances. Arthur, meanwhile, retreated to the one place he felt truly safe: his library. It was his sanctuary of order, a vast two-story room lined with thousands of leather-bound books, each in its precise location. It was the heart of his control. He did not light a fire, though the evening was cool. He sat in the dark, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand. He was not angry. He was annihilated. He had allowed himself to feel. He had stood in the rain, and the inevitable result, the one his father had warned him about, had come to pass. Betrayal, ruin. He had been made a fool of. The garden, now bursting with colour and life outside his window, seemed to be mocking him. It was her garden now, not his. He must have dozed, lulled by the brandy and the emotional exhaustion. He awoke with a start, not to a sound, but to a smell. Smoke. He opened his eyes. The room was hazy, and an eerie orange light flickered from the hallway. He threw open the library door. The main staircase was engulfed in flames. "Fire!" he bellowed, his voice hoarse. "Fire!" He heard shouts, screams from the upper floors as the servants awoke. The fire was spreading with unnatural speed, racing along the old dry tapestries. His first thought was escape. His second thought, the one that overrode everything, was the ledgers, the estate papers, his father's portrait above the mantel, the symbols of his entire life. He ran back into the library, ignoring the smoke burning his lungs. He pulled the heavy portrait from the wall. As he reached for the strongbox in his desk, a deafening groan came from above. The ceiling, burning from the floor above, gave way. A massive, blazing oak beam crashed down, striking the desk, missing him by inches but blocking his exit. He was trapped. The air was thick black smoke, and the heat was unbearable. He dropped to the floor, coughing, dragging the portrait, but the wall of flame was impenetrable. This was it. He was going to die. He was going to die in his fortress, consumed by the very thing he'd tried to control. Outside, Clara was halfway down the main drive, her satchel on her back, when she heard the first scream. She turned. The west wing of Blackwood Manor was a roaring inferno, smoke and embers pouring into the night sky. "My God! Arthur!" she breathed. She didn't think. She dropped her bag and ran. Back toward the house. The servants were in a panic on the front lawn, Jennings attempting a roll call. "The Duke! Has anyone seen the Duke? He's in the library. He never left." Thomas, the footman, cried. "It's blocked. The main stair is gone." Clara grabbed a heavy garden axe from the tool shed. "The terrace doors!" she screamed at Jennings. "The library. Are they locked?" "Yes, miss. From the inside." Clara ran to the terrace. The heat so intense it seared her face. The glass was black with smoke. "Stand back!" she yelled. She swung the axe, shattering the heavy glass panes. Smoke and superheated air billowed out, throwing her backward. "Your Grace! Arthur!" she screamed into the blackness. She heard a faint, rasping cough. She tied her shawl over her mouth and plunged into the smoke-filled room. She couldn't see. She could only feel, crawling on her hands and knees. She tripped over the fallen beam. It was still burning. "Arthur! Here!" His voice was a weak rasp. She found him, pinned by a fallen bookcase, the heavy portrait lying across his legs. He was conscious, but barely. "You came back," he wheezed. "Don't talk," she commanded. Her voice was pure steel. "We have to move this." She tried to leverage the bookcase, but it was too heavy. The fire was closing in. "The leg. We have to break the leg of the case." She used the axe, striking the carved leg of the bookcase, ignoring the flames licking at her dress. The wood splintered. She gave a final heave, and the case shifted just enough for Arthur to pull his legs free. "My ankle! It's broken!" he gasped. "Then I will be your legs. Put your arm around me. Now." She hauled the Duke of Ashworth to his feet. He was a dead weight, but she was strong from weeks of digging and hauling. She dragged him, step by agonizing step, toward the broken terrace doors, shielding his face with her own body. Just as they reached the opening, the rest of the ceiling collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame. The blast threw them clear onto the gravel. Clara landed hard, her arm catching the edge of a stone urn. She heard a sickening snap and cried out, a sharp, piercing sound, before the adrenaline and smoke finally claimed her, and she fell into darkness. Arthur, his ankle shattered, but his mind, horrifyingly clear, lay on the gravel beside her. He watched as his library, his fortress, his past, was consumed by the fire, until the only light came from the inferno, and the only sound was the crackle of his life turning to ash. He looked at the unconscious woman beside him, her arm bent at an unnatural angle, her hair singed, her face black with soot. She had come back. The liar. The survivor. She had plunged into the fire he had locked her out of, and she had saved his life. The fire, though devastating, was contained to the west wing. The library, the study, and the grand staircase were gone. Blackwood Manor stood, but it was scarred, a gaping, blackened wound open to the sky. Arthur awoke 2 days later in his own bed. His ankle was professionally set, his burns treated. The first thing he saw was Mr. Davies, sitting watch by his bed. "Your Grace," the old gardener said, his voice thick with relief. "Thank God. The fire," Arthur managed, his throat raw. "Contained, Your Grace. The east wing is untouched. Miss Benson. Davenport. Where is she?" Davies's face fell. "She is in the guest wing, Your Grace. The doctor has been with her. Her arm was badly broken. A clean snap," he said. "And the smoke, her lungs, she is very weak." "She saved my life," Arthur stated. It was not a question. "Aye," Davies said, twisting his cap. "That she did. Like a lioness, she was." He paused. "Your Grace, we found the source of the fire. It was arson." Arthur looked at him, the pieces clicking into place. The sabotage, the fire. "It was Lord Harrington," Arthur guessed, his voice cold. "No, Your Grace. It was me." Arthur stared at the old man. Davies broke down, sobbing. Harrington, he knew I had debts from the tables. He threatened to expose me, to have me sent to prison. He said I just had to ruin the girl's work, make her look a fool. But when she wouldn't leave, when you kept her, he demanded more. He wanted you ruined. He wanted your house dark. He gave me the oil. I never meant for anyone to be hurt. I swear on my wife's grave." Arthur listened, and the last of the ice in his veins did not just crack. It melted. It was not Clara's passion that had caused the ruin. It was Davies's weakness. It was Harrington's greed. It was his own father's pride. It was his own cold, isolating obsession with control that had made him a target. He had hidden from the chaos of life, only to be consumed by the calculated malice of men. "Leave me," Arthur said. Davies fled, expecting the constabulary. Arthur, against his doctor's orders, rose from the bed. He used a cane, and, leaning heavily on the wall, made his way out of the house. He ignored the shocked servants. He walked past the ruined, smoking wing of his home. He looked at the black hole where his library had been. He saw the charred remains of his father's portrait, and felt nothing. A strange, terrifying, wonderful nothing. It was just burnt canvas. He walked, his broken ankle screaming in protest, until he reached the garden. It was damaged. The heat from the fire had scorched the borders closest to the house. The lawn was trampled by the fire brigade. It was a mess. He found her there. Clara was sitting on the stone bench by the woods, her arm bound tightly in a sling, her face pale and bruised. She was staring at the ruin of the house. She heard him approach and tensed, but did not turn. He did not stand 10 feet away. He walked until he was beside her, and with a pained groan, he lowered himself onto the bench. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the birds sing in the surviving trees. "The doctor said you are to remain in bed," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "So are you," he replied. He looked at her, truly looked at her, her profile smudged with soot and exhaustion. "Why did you come back?" She turned to him, her hazel eyes clear and deep. "Because I heard you yell. And for a second, I forgot you were a duke. I just knew Arthur St. Vincent was in a fire." He absorbed this. He had been a title for so long, he had forgotten he was a man. "Harrington," he said, "will be arrested. Davies has confessed. It was It was all of them, not you. I am still Clara Davenport, she said quietly. I still lied. Yes, Arthur said. You did, and I was a fool. She looked at him, confused. You were right. I deceived you. No, he said, shaking his head. I was a fool for believing a name mattered more than a person. I was a fool for thinking that this, he gestured to the ruined library, was strength. It was a prison. It's gone, and I find I am relieved. He reached out, not with his gloved hand, but with his bare one. He hesitated, then gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a speck of ash. She did not flinch. You taught me about the soil, he said, struggling for the words. You said it was dead. You were right. I was dead. Sterile. I had given up. He looked at the flourishing, chaotic, beautiful, and slightly damaged garden around them. And you, he whispered, you are the chaos. Is that a condemnation, Your Grace? It is. A revelation. He met her gaze, and for the first time, his eyes were not cold. They were clear and pained and deeply, profoundly alive. The garden is a ruin. My house is a ruin. I find I do not care. They are just things. Will you help me rebuild? Not as it was, but as it should be. Clara looked from his eyes to the ruined house and back again. She saw the man he was, not the duke he had been. I am not a duchess, Arthur, she said softly. I am a gardener, with a broken arm and a ruined name. I am not seeking a duchess, he said, his hand moving from her cheek to hold her good one. I am seeking a partner, someone who is not afraid of the dirt, or the fire, or the rain. He leaned in, and his kiss was not the kiss of a cold duke. It was hesitant, and real, and filled with the smoky promise of a new beginning. It was the feeling of a man who had finally, after a lifetime of hiding, stepped out into the storm. 3 months had passed. The sharp, acrid scent of burnt timber and ash had finally been washed from the air by the persistent, soft rains of late autumn. Where the opulent, suffocating west wing had stood, there now existed a sprawling, muddy foundation and the skeletal framework of new construction. Blackwood Manor was a scar, but it was a clean one, open to the sky and ready to be reshaped. The society papers had feasted on the scandal. First, the fire. Second, the astonishing arrest of Lord Harrington, his reputation ruined beyond repair. Third, the quiet disgrace of Mr. Davies, who, having confessed all, was dismissed from service. But the most voracious, whispered gossip of all was that the Duke of Ashworth, the Stone Duke, was not only rebuilding, but he was doing so with Clara Davenport, the bankrupt's daughter, permanently at his side. They had commandeered the grand ballroom, the largest undamaged room, as their makeshift office. The vast, polished floor was covered not with dancers, but with architectural drawings, stacks of books on horticulture, and lists of masonry orders. Arthur, his ankle healed, but his gait now marked by a slight, thoughtful limp, stood over a draught. He no longer wore the impossibly restrictive coats of his former life. He was in shirt sleeves, his hair slightly unkempt. The architect, he said, his voice no longer the flat instrument of command, but a reflective murmur, is adamant that the library be restored precisely as it was. A monument to the St. Vincent legacy, he called it. Clara, her arm now free of its sling but still weak, came to stand beside him. She traced the lines of the old familiar room on the blueprint. It was a beautiful room, she said quietly, and it was a fortress. You were trapped in there long before the fire, Arthur. He looked at her, his gaze clear. The Duke would have seen her words as an impertinent critique. Arthur saw only the truth. He picked up a heavy charcoal pencil. With a decisive swoosh, he drew a bold line through the entire blueprint. "My legacy," he said, "is not in that room. It is out there." He gestured toward the gardens. "We will build a glass house, a great conservatory, a place for light and air and chaos." A smile touched her lips. "The architect will faint." "He will learn," Arthur said, a corresponding smile finally reaching his own eyes. A cold drizzle began to tap against the towering windows of the ballroom. It was the kind of damp, miserable weather he had once used as an excuse to lock himself away, to retreat into his ledgers and his anger. Clara watched him as he walked to the window. He did not check the latch. He did not turn away. Instead, he pushed the heavy glass open a few inches, letting the cool, damp air, smelling of wet earth and decaying leaves, fill the room. He held his hand out, palm up, just as she had taught him in the storm. "It's cold," he observed. "Yes," she said, coming to stand beside him, lacing her good hand through his. "And it's wet." "Very." He looked at their joined hands, then out at the dormant, muddy garden, scarred by the fire but waiting for spring. "And it is," he said, "extraordinary." He turned and drew her in, kissing her not with the desperate fire of their reconciliation, but with the steady, quiet promise of 1,000 shared mornings, of seasons to come, of a life to be built from the ground up. He was no longer a man hiding from the world. He was a man learning to live in it. The Duke who feared feeling, and the woman who felt everything. They found their new beginning not in the ashes of a grand manor, but in the rich, messy soil of a garden they would rebuild together. Arthur learned that true strength isn't about control. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable, to tear down your own walls, and to let in the chaos of life. He didn't just learn to feel the rain. He learned that she was the rain, washing away his cold past and allowing a new life to grow. Thank you for joining us for this dramatic story. We hope their journey moved you. If you were touched by Arthur and Clara's story, please show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps our channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with someone else who loves a story of transformation and second chances. And of course, if you want to hear more tales of drama, romance, and redemption, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new story. We appreciate every one of you. See you next time.